Welcome. I'm Dr. Aimee Baron. This is Rabbi Segelman, Rabbi Ilan Segelman. We're really excited to be here today because this is a topic on I was supposed to have a baby that has been discussed over and over again. And we've wanted to be able to bring you as much information as possible in a private and protected way in order to be able to keep this anonymous. So here we are. I'm thrilled to introduce Rabbi Ilan Segelman, who from PUAH, who has been, he and his entire team from PUAH they have truly been the champions of people who have been struggling to have children and being able to offer halachic options for those that obviously qualify. PUAH has been an absolutely incredible resource for these families. And I'm really going to let him do most of the talking here today and just guide him through the different pieces to make sure that we're covering everything that we would like to cover and that you want us to cover. We have some questions that have been submitted in advance, and we will get to as many of them as we can. If in the meantime, during this session, for those of you who didn't have the opportunity to hear our little back and forth in the beginning, you can submit questions at any point, which are totally anonymous, through the Q&A or through the chat box. You can actually do, if you do it through the Q&A, it'll be totally anonymous. If you do the chat box, then we will, one second, let me just grab this for a second. We can hear you, we can see. So the Q&A is totally anonymous. You can ask any questions through there. If it is relevant to what Rabbi Segelman is speaking about at the moment, he will do his best to answer. Otherwise, we will get to this at the end. We have blocked off 90 minutes for this talk. I don't think we will need this much time, but we are here if you have questions and you want us to be here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Segelman. Rabbi Segelman, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here, and it's a pleasure. So sometimes people say it's a pleasure, but for me, it's actually a pleasure because this is a topic which is near and dear to my heart. It is a topic that I speak to couples about every single day, basically without exception. Okay, calls come in regarding egg donation, surrogacy, sperm donation, even uterine transplantation. All of these questions come in literally on a daily basis, and it is something which my week is full of. So it really is a pleasure to speak about it, and especially in such a forum where we can discuss things openly, but still in a safe space. So I really do appreciate that. One word of introduction is that I'm happy and comfortable to discuss these topics at length and get quite delve deep into the topics from a halachic perspective, from a hashkafic perspective, from a medical perspective. However, it is important to know and really to understand clearly that what we'll talk about today, the things that I'll say, should not be taken as an authoritative psak. It should not be taken as the bottom line ruling for anyone specific. Something when it comes to third-party reproduction, it is something which is so super sensitive and so individualized that each couple really should have their own conversation with their own discussion relevant to their situation. And I am happy to do so, and I know Dr. Baron is happy to do so on a personal level. But here, this forum will available for you to learn more about the topics, and it maybe at future opportunities we can discuss more personalized. But it's also very important to make it very clear that this is not a halachic psak that is an overall psak. It is just a discussion where we can discuss these things openly and honestly.
Perfect. Thank you so much for laying the groundwork. And another piece that I'm going to add, which we discussed a little bit in the beginning, for those of you who missed it. So the topics that Rabbi Segelman are going to discuss tonight are egg donation, surrogacy, and sperm donation. We are not going to discuss single mothers by choice and those pieces that is off the table for this conversation. So we're going to limit the questions and the conversation to those specific topics. Okay, so let's just jump right in. And can you give us a history of the background, the different halachos, the hashkafos of, why is this an issue at all? Why is it that some people say it is absolutely totally fine? Some people say it's absolutely totally not fine. I mean, we're going to get into obviously more of the details in these specific different areas, but can you give us just a general overall gestalt of the history of the halachos, the history of this area, and where the different viewpoints are coming from?
Yeah. With technology, with reproductive technology, so as the technology advances, the questions become more and more complicated. So at a time when insemination was really the only treatment on the table, so the rabbis discussed insemination. And it's interesting that when they were discussing insemination, the question was a new question. The thought of foreign sperm, artificial insemination, either the husband's sperm or a foreign sperm entering a woman's body was something which was so novel, and it was just so, it was just so difficult for people to wrap their heads around such a treatment. And it's fascinating to see over time the complexity and the sophistication of the treatment and the rabbinic attitude towards the treatment. What I want to share with you is something fascinating, and that is to really go back to the very beginning of IVF. And what was the rabbinic attitude when IVF hit the scene? In 1978, when Louise Brown was born, she's the first IVF baby. So immediately at that point, all of the rabbanim were being asked the question of, can we do IVF? It seems like a funny question, like, of course, IVF, IVF is a no-brainer, but it certainly was not a no-brainer in 1978 and 1980 in the beginning. In fact, many rabbis were very hesitant, to say the least, to give a halachic psak and allow for couples to utilize reproductive technology to get pregnant. And it was only years down the line, it was actually with Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, who was the chief rabbi of Israel at the time, who approached Rav Menachem Borstein, who was the founder of PUAH, and the two of them had a meeting, and the objective of the meeting was, how can we identify all of the various oppositions, all of the various issues that the Rabbanim have raised with IVF, and how can we address those issues? How can we, instead of closing the door, open the door and try to find how we can address and properly navigate those issues and allow the couples to take advantage and to celebrate modern technology in order to build their families. So that was a struggle. That was a real fight and a real struggle. And it was no simple endeavor back then, about 30, 35 years ago. Baruch Hashem, we fast forward 35, 40 years, the attitude is completely different. The attitude is completely different, to the point where Rav Moshe Sternbach, who was one of the great poskim in Eretz Yisrael, Charedi poskim, who I think actually had a pacemaker put in today, Yishev Refuah Shlema. He initially ruled that IVF was prohibited. It was off the table. And if you look, he has many, and the truth is I have his svarim behind me, 7 volumes of Tshuvas Hanhagos. And as each volume was put out year after year, his attitude towards IVF shifted to the point where his one of his most recent volumes, he has come full circle, or 180, and he is ruling that it might even be a mitzvah to go ahead and do IVF. Why? Because times have changed. The community, society has accepted this as mainstream. And since this is the mainstream method and technique and tool that's used in order to have children, so remember, we're dealing with the mitzvah of puruvu. So let's utilize what technology has at our fingertips. Just like we wouldn't think twice. We wouldn't turn down a cancer treatment. We wouldn't turn down this type of, this protocol. So why are we turning down this protocol? It's the same thing. And it's fascinating to see the evolution and the shift in attitude from IVF being completely prohibited to what is nowadays certainly accepted and even perhaps a mitzvah.
Wow.
Now, that's just the background when it comes to IVF. So just to paint the picture, IVF shouldn't be what we assume to be so obviously permitted and permissible. It was a struggle. So now, given that background, it allows us to appreciate a little bit what the overall hesitancy and reluctancy and I don't want to say opposition, but at least confusion towards an attitude towards third-party reproduction, where we're introducing a foreign genetic material, whether it be egg or sperm. Now, maybe we could distinguish between egg donation and sperm donation in terms of from a halachic perspective. If the mitzvah of PUAH is really a man's mitzvah, of course, a woman is necessary in order for the man to carry out the mitzvah of PUAH. And the Rishonim and Kiddushin discuss what exactly is the nature of the woman's involvement, and certainly there is a mitzvah there as well. It's just not the actual mitzvah of PUAH. Maybe it's another mitzvah of sheves. So when we're dealing with sperm donation, so one critical question is if the underlying impetus and our the underlying reason for us to want to be as makel as possible and to be lenient as possible, to allow all these things to happen, is that so the husband can fulfill his mitzvah of PUAH. So many poskim question when it comes to sperm donation, how can we allow such a thing if anyway the husband is not going to be the father because it's going to be foreign sperm? Perhaps that same question might lead a rav or a couple to feel more comfortable with a Jewish egg, so that the husband may in fact be in fulfillment of the mitzvah of PUAH. Although that is a caveat that hopefully we'll discuss soon, and that really depends on who the halachic mother is. How halacha views motherhood, whether it's the egg mother, the genetic contributor, or the one who gives birth, that would also impact the question. But just to give a basic understanding, I think that when we come to the question with this perspective, that really the overall justification is we want PUAH from a halachic standpoint. I'm not dealing with from a medical standpoint or an emotional standpoint, that a father wants to be a father and a mother wants to be a mother and a couple wants to have a family. So that there's certainly something to say about that. And I will mention it hopefully soon, in the context of sperm donation. But we always, one of the main and the first steps that the poskim will turn to in order to, before analyzing this question of reproductive medical technology and certainly third party, is what is the halachic justification, i.e. the mitzvah of PUAH, will it be fulfilled and will it not be fulfilled? And when it will be fulfilled, there's more of grounds to be lenient in other areas because we have the justification. And if we don't have the mitzvah of PUAH, so then we're going to have to find a different justification for allowing us to do things which could be controversial, could be questionable. And again, we're going to have to kind of dissect that. What exactly is the nature of that, controversial treatment? Why is that controversial? Why is it confusing? Why is using a third party, an egg or a different uterus to be something which is halakhically confusing? So there's a lot that goes into the question, into the situation, and that's partially why we had to preface that this is not a psak for each and every person, but everyone is encouraged to have that personal conversation because each couple's situation is different and the nature of the justification is different, for couple A than couple B.
Okay, so if I'm going to now infer based on everything that you just said, so then because if we're going, if the starting point is the basis of PUAH, which is a man's mitzvah, so then therefore then having a donor egg, which would be for the woman, and it's still, the man is still using his sperm. So that sounds like, as a person who doesn't obviously understand these halachos nor know them, it sounds like having a donor egg is somewhat easier to justify from a halachic standpoint if you're using the basis of PUAH. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so tell us more about the donor egg piece, and I'm curious, and I'm guessing the answer also is correct. Is I'm guessing the answer to this as well is, are there some post-skim also out there, as you discussed donor egg, are there some post-skim out there that are allow donor eggs, but do not allow donor sperm?
Yeah. Okay. So let's the mitzvah of Puruvu is a good place to kind of go back on. That would be our pivotal point. So in order for the husband to be Makayim Puruvu, in order for the husband to fulfill his mitzvah of Puruvu, so according to most poskim, there are always outliers, by the way. There's always outliers. There are always interesting, rulings on all ends. So really, you can find so many of the different, it's fascinating to see all the different shitas, all the different opinions out there. But for the most part, the bottom line would be, is the child absolutely Jewish, or is the child not Jewish? Because, I'll give you an example. I had a case where a woman was unable to produce her own eggs, and she was also unable to carry. So she needed an egg donor, and she also needed a surrogate. Now, the clinic, the specific fertility clinic that she was in, offered an amazing deal for an egg plus surrogate. It was like a package deal. You go with us, with our clinic, we'll broker the egg, and the surrogate will find out all the pieces, and you just give us the sperm, we'll take care of the rest. And it was significantly cheaper than the otherwise, than going the other route of going to an egg bank and outside and a surrogacy, which, we could discuss it now or a different time. It's so expensive. So this was really this was very attractive for her, because it was financially, it was feasible. She could do it. And the issue was that the egg that she would be getting and the surrogate that she would be getting would almost definitely be non-Jewish. So in terms of genetic material, the only genetic material that this child would have from one of the parents is the sperm. But, Orthodox Judaism doesn't subscribe to patrilineal descent. We need matrilineal. We need the mother to be the mother to determine Judaism. And therefore, either way you slice it over here, neither the egg nor the uterus was going to be Jewish. So the question is it permissible for this husband to procure a sperm sample and for his wife to take a non-Jewish egg, a non-Jewish surrogate, and to have a baby? Most poskim that I spoke to were uncomfortable with it. Even poskim who were otherwise generally comfortable with the notion of egg donation and surrogacy in general, they weren't comfortable here. It happens to be, I spoke to Rabbi Weiss, and for this specific couple, it was important that they go ahead with it. And he actually wrote me a letter to address to the Beis Din that they should go ahead with it, and they should do the treatment. And this is years ago. She has twin girls from that. That procedure. So Baruch Hashem. Now, there's no Puruvu over there. It's very hard to say they're Puruvu. Rabbi Weiss had a possibility, maybe since they're gonna convert, so maybe per the Gemara Yavamis they may have a partial mitzvah of Puruvu. Okay, but it's hard to hear, and yet we were able to help this woman be a mother of twins. Now, that's an outlier situation.
Correct.
Most of the time, we have the classic case of a woman who calls and says, my doctor told me I need a donor egg. Whether I have premature ovarian failure or diminished ovarian reserve, whether I'm a cancer survivor and I wasn't able to freeze eggs before my chemotherapy and radiation, whether I've gone to the doctor and I'm just, my age doesn't allow me to produce eggs, my AMH is too low, my FSH is too high, whatever the case is,
right,
you need an egg. So then the next question is, well, do I take a Jewish egg or a non-Jewish egg? And I go through the different options. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages on both sides? So the advantage of a Jewish egg is that the husband will be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Puruvu. Why? Because either way you slice it, and as I mentioned, there's this question, this machlokas, this debate, how to determine motherhood. is it the one who gives birth, or is it the one who contributes the genetic material? Here, it doesn't make a difference. Just like a woman who conceives naturally, we don't know why she's the mother, but she's the mother because it was her egg and she conceived naturally, because she gave birth and she conceived naturally and gave birth. It doesn't make a difference. She is the mother. But when you divorce the two, right? When you separate womb from egg,
Right.
so then it really pushes us into a corner, and we have to make a decision. So one of the advantages of a Jewish egg is that we check all the boxes. We're all Jewish. Now, since you're all Jewish, the husband, his sperm fertilized a Jewish egg, and a Jewish womb gave birth to the egg. So therefore, the husband fulfills his mitzvah, PUAH. If the egg was not Jewish, let's say, and it's the egg mother who in fact is the mother, then what that means is that this egg, this baby, is not Jewish. Therefore, on a practical level, we almost always will have a gerus, a gior, a conversion, just to make sure that we are satisfying all opinions. But then it would be hard to justify that this child who is potentially not Jewish and needed a conversion will also be Jewish to allow for the husband to fulfill his mitzvah PUAH. It's hard to make that argument. We would seemingly say that if the child needed a gerus, if the child needed a conversion, that means that it's not the father, that's not the father's child, and therefore the PUAH was broken. So that may be a disadvantage of taking a non-Jewish egg. An advantage of taking a non-Jewish egg is the concern that the more Jewish eggs that are circulating in the Jewish community, and it's done with complete anonymity, so the concern of one of these children meeting another one of their brother or their sister, their half-brother or half-sister, and sharing some of the same features and actually falling in love, because we love ourselves. So we actually fall in love with that because I see a little bit of myself in you because you share a mother genetically, right? And then we can have a serious issue of siblings marry, which we see throughout the Gemara, that we are always very concerned for that outcome. So there are advantages, there are disadvantages, and definitely one of the advantages of a Jewish egg is the mitzvah of PUAH. A disadvantage is the way the Gemara calls it, Shema Yisa Ach Es Achoso, a brother may marry a sister. Another advantage of a Jewish egg is that we know, at least when it's done with PUAH, we're able to do supervision, and we know exactly what the nature of this donor is. We know if she's single, and which, according to some poskim, they will only allow a single Jewish woman to donate because they don't want a married woman to donate the egg. Because if the egg mother is the mother, right? And let's say the egg mother is Sarah, and Sarah is married to Abraham, and now we take Sarah's egg and we fertilize that egg with Reuven's sperm. So now Sarah is having a baby with Reuven when Sarah is married to Abraham. So to avoid potential issues of mamzerus, of married women, they're not giving birth or having relations. Of course, there's no physical intimacy, there's no physical contact at all between anyone other than husband and wife.
Right.
Nevertheless, if we'll go trace back our logic that the egg mother is the mother, and we go back to her personal life and she's married to somebody else, we wouldn't want to confuse or to mix the marriages, because mixing marriages gets complicated. It could be potential questions of mamzerus. So we generally want to stay far away from that. And therefore, when we take a Jewish egg, we're able to know, and it's done with hashgacha. So we're able to know that she's in fact Jewish because we're able to do the background check on her. We're able to know that she's single. We're able to even do the bezdin when they do the background check, make sure that she's not a mamzeres, that she's not an illegitimate child. So there is extensive research that is done behind each and every donor, right? In addition to the emotional tests, evaluations that donors have to have, and the screening process, the medical evaluation that they have. There's also a religious screening that we're able to do. generally the couples feel more comfortable. They feel more comfortable that they're able to kind of keep the genes, within the club, in the religion.
There is, I'll just tell you, just because you brought it up, there is a family that I've worked with who on a different issue, and the mother revealed to me that she donated, excuse me one second. Love you. Good night. Sorry. That she donated her eggs to a friend who had diminished ovarian reserve like 20 some odd years ago. And the children don't know. And, these issues that you're bringing, these halachic issues of mamzeros, it's incredibly, incredibly complicated. And so I thank you so much for even, broaching this topic now, because these are all things that, again, as you said, that every person, every couple needs to speak to their own posek and figure this out for themselves. Everyone needs their own sock. Someone's asking here, which is relevant: if a woman donates an egg when she's single, but then she gets married later, is that an issue?
It's an excellent question. That is an excellent question. I've asked this question to Rabbi Cohen in Flatbush, and Rabbi David has said, as paskin, that as long as the egg was harvested as a single woman when she was single, so even if she gets married later on, the eggs can still be used. And considered single. Similarly, if a woman is married to a non-Jewish man, which happens often, we'll be able to identify this woman as Jewish, although she's not religious and she's married and living together with a non-Jewish man. Since halacha doesn't recognize the union, the marriage between a Jew and non-Jew, so halachically, although she's civilly married to this non-Jewish man, halachically she is single, and that would also be an acceptable egg. That would pass according to Rav David's requirement of a single Jewish woman. I do want to tell you, you reminded me when you were telling me that couple. I have a couple. One of the couples that I've been with for many years, Hasidic couple from Brooklyn. I met with him years ago. Him and his wife. I remember they came to my house and they were so nervous. They literally they were circling, making sure that no one was watching them. I assured him, I said, at the time I was in Kew Gardens Hills. Nobody knows you. Don't worry. Come in. No one saw you. Just sit down. They were so nervous, and he was just so nervous about everything. We spoke about egg donation, and this question came up: Jewish or non-Jewish? And he was so nervous that if it was a Jewish egg, he would have this obligation and responsibility to follow the child to the chuppah to make sure that the chassan or kala, the bride, the groom, whoever they would end up marrying, depending on the gender of the child, was also not from an egg donor, however he would determine that. And he was so nervous about it that at a certain point I just told him, we're going in a different direction. We're going the non-Jewish route, because he was also nervous. I may not be alive. He's no youngster. Right. He's not old, but I think he was in his 40s. So he said, who's to say that, I'm going to be around in 20 years, in 25 years? Hopefully I will, but you never know. And if I'm not around, then who is going to worry that this child, and who's going to see to it that the child will be able to marry kosher? And he was so nervous about it, to the point where I told him, I think we should just kind of shift gears. Well, let's consider the non-Jewish route, and you won't have to worry that that you're going to marry a sibling, because the genetic material was from a non-Jew. Right. So you don't have that issue at all. The PS on that story is he called me literally a month ago, maybe less than a month ago. He's back considering Jewish eggs. He still hasn't been able to pull the trigger yet. It's so hard for him to get over all of his anxieties. And we're just running. We're running around in circles at this point, and I just feel bad when he calls. There's nothing I can. I've given him the psak so many times. It's mutter. People do it. Just you spoke to this Rav, you spoke to that Rav. Just go. But it's very difficult for him.
Right. And so I'm going to ask a follow-up question, which I think I already know the answer to, but I want to make sure. So one question that came in previously was, can I donate eggs to my sister and brother-in-law? And so Rabbi, based on what you're saying, I think the answer to that is no, but
again, it would certainly depend on the question that we have discussed. Yeah, who's the mother? If you assume that the mother is the birth mother, and there are a significant number of poskim who do subscribe to that approach, that the birth mother is the mother. So it really doesn't make a difference which egg I use. I can use my sisters, I can use my mothers, I can use my daughters, I can use my non-Jewish, because all that matters is me, and I'm a Jewish woman, and I'm giving birth to that baby. So that baby is my baby and Jewish 100%. Now, if you use an egg of a sibling, of a sister, so you are going to enter that very complicated machlokes of who the mother is. And according to one side of the argument, it would be an issue. It would be a big issue. Another perspective that I could offer is this perspective of sitting around the Shabbos table or the Yontif table or the Thanksgiving table, whatever it is, and watching your sister, right, you gave that egg, right? And watching your sister reprimand that child, yell at that child, give that child a patch, whatever it is, and you say to yourself, how dare you treat my daughter like that, right? And then she'll look back at you and say, this is not your daughter, this is my daughter. And you say, oh, really, it's your daughter? Genetically, she would come up, like, the amount of shalom bias, potential shalom bias issues that a couple could enter once they share genetic material with a sibling or of a community member that they are, that when it's done not anonymously and they know who it is, it could get very sticky. So I think for all of as attractive as it sounds, the grandpa will be grandpa. You don't have to worry about, there's some foreign grandfather will be the grandfather, but no, there's something really very beautiful about keeping it in the family and keeping the gene pool within us. We've just seen over the years, just the amount of tension and unnecessary trauma that couples will have to endure, knowing that their donor is at the other end of the table, is at the other line of the phone. It's just keeping it anonymous is so much healthier for most couples, that to the point where we would even convince a couple not to use it. Although I did get a question this past week from someone in Brooklyn, from the Sephardic community. Apparently there was a young girl in the community who passed away from cancer, and her eggs were frozen before she died. And one of the rabbis is kind of overseeing these eggs. The parents, I guess, appointed the rabbi to be in charge of the eggs. And this, I guess the rabbi approached the couple approached the rabbi, and he said, would you want these eggs? Like maybe he would even give them for free, because the parents would want as a chesed to allow their daughter to, their daughter's eggs. And unfortunately, she's no longer living, but at least her legacy, to live on. So I warned him that it has to be very clear that the parents should not and cannot know that you as a couple are the beneficiaries of the child, of this girl's eggs, because if you make a move that those parents don't like with those kids, it's going to be very, 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 there's going to be a tremendous amount of tension, and it's not worth it at all.
Absolutely. You're talking about the emotional pieces, the hashkafa, like this is so far beyond the halacha, but obviously all of these pieces are so intertwined and so important when making a decision, when a couple comes to you and asks, asks for your best thoughts. Can
I just add one more thing?
Sure, please.
It was because you mentioned it. Another example of where a non-halachic advice or a non-halachic approach or attitude might be very helpful for a couple to know. I had a case of a young girl who had cervical cancer, unfortunately, and it was creeping into the uterus, and the doctors had told her unequivocally, we're taking everything out, a full hysterectomy, we're taking out the uterus, we're taking out the ovaries, everything. But they did allow her, they said, we will have time to freeze eggs, right? So this woman calls me and she says, I was doing my research online and I saw that frozen embryos may be better, they may have a better chance of yielding a live birth than frozen eggs, right? So I would want to freeze embryos as opposed to just freezing eggs. Now the issue is that this woman was a kala, she was engaged, she wasn't married. So she asked if she's allowed to create embryos with her chassan, with her groom's sperm, right before their wedding, can they create embryos, premarital embryo creation? That was the question. And it was a fascinating question. And again, she was going to utilize she was going to have to use a surrogate in the future or a uterine transplant to actually, for that live birth to take place. But at least in the interim, she would be able to freeze embryos as opposed to eggs, going with the approach that embryos freeze better and thaw better than eggs. Parenthetic, I wrote a whole article about it. It was published in the RJJ Journal about this question. All of the different considerations. Bottom line, she wanted one thing that I told her, which I think hit home, was the fact that you're not married yet, right? You're not married yet. What happens if he walks out? What happens if he says, you know what, you're a cancer patient, things are, I'm not interested. I don't want to go ahead with this. I'm walking out, and he wants to leave. I said, and excuse the pun, but I said, you're literally putting all of your eggs in one basket, and he walks away. You are left with all of your eggs, and it's possible you're never going to be able to create more eggs in the future after your chemo and radiation. So you want all of your eggs to be fertilized with his sperm? So I said, just be careful to make sure you don't run into, don't make a rash decision because, you're emotional about it. Let's think about what we're doing. She ended up doing half, half with this, half eggs, half embryo. But just I think that's what she ended up doing. But just that perspective of like, even if it's halachically okay and medically that's accepted, that would be the best thing medically and halachically, we give you the green light. But remember, that might not be, that might not be the best eitzah, that might not be the best advice for you in this situation. So anyway, just another example of just because the halacha says one thing and medicine says something doesn't necessarily mean that's the best course of action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now, which is the perfect transition to touch on surrogacy, because this is a woman that would need, even if she was using her eggs, we're not talking about different eggs or different sperm in this specific situation, because the assumption is she got married, and the assumption is that she was using the embryos that were created with her sperm, her eggs, and her husband's sperm. So can you give us a little bit of a discussion about surrogacy and the intricacies of the halachos?
Yeah, it shouldn't be much different than egg donation, but just flip it over. So the issue with surrogacy is that if it's a non-Jewish carrier, so according to the opinion that the woman who gives birth is the mother, so then the baby is not going to be Jewish. And then a gerus will have to be implemented, and all of those halachos, which are complicated. What makes surrogacy so difficult is the availability of Jewish surrogates in America. It is not impossible to find a Jewish surrogate, but it is extremely difficult to find a Jewish surrogate. Whereas when it comes to egg donation, there are agencies that deal exclusively, or at least they deal with Jewish eggs. There is an organization called the Chosen One Egg Donation. A woman named Talia and her husband Yarin have a really wonderful egg donation agency. We work with them all the time. I have myself she recently moved to San Diego. She does a lot of the egg retrievals in the Valley in Los Angeles. I recently moved to Los Angeles, and I have been to the lab, and she is extremely welcoming to me and the whole PUAH team. She is very transparent. She gives me all of the information that we ask for. She's really an open book. Now, when it comes to the couple, there's complete anonymity. The couple will never find out who the donor is. The donor does not know who the couple is. That's for sure. It's done in a very professional manner. But the trust that we have with each other makes it very easy. I can literally, we do all the background checks. I have all of let's say the paperwork from the Beis Din, and then our ladies, our supervisors will go in, and I actually have a video from last week where she looked at her Teudat Zehut. It was an Israeli woman. She took her passport and Teudat Zehut, and she compared it to the certification that the Beis Din gave, and we were able to know absolutely that the eggs that the couple will be receiving is from the woman who we are told she is, and who the Beis Din met with and interviewed and proved that she was Jewish. So it's really a very seamless, procedure of, with working together with her. And it's not very easy, but it's available. Jewish eggs are available. When we shift to surrogacy, surrogates are usually not available. It's very hard to find a Jewish surrogate. Sometimes agencies, and don't be fooled by agencies, surrogacy agencies telling you, oh yeah, we have a Jewish surrogate, we have a Jewish surrogate. They may say that, and I don't want to say anything negative about any agency, and I'm not going to say any names of specific agencies, but I know I just have seen it all too often where they'll lure the couple in because they want the business, they want to help you, whether it's altruistic, they want to help you, but they really don't have Jewish surrogates available because it's really difficult to find them. And then having to take the surrogate that presents Jewish, but just because someone presents Jewish doesn't mean that halachically we can consider them Jewish. So then they need to go through the Beis Din process of the validating and verifying the Jewish status. And very often the surrogates are doing enough. They don't want to go through another step. They don't want to go through another process. So really, since there are no agencies that deal exclusively or primarily with Jewish surrogates, we're dealing with major surrogacy agencies that kind of want to help if they can, but often it's difficult. Now in Israel, it's interesting, the flip issue. There's the flip issue. Jewish surrogates in Israel are more available, but it's difficult to procure a Jewish egg in Israel. So they have the opposite issue. Many people in Israel actually go to Eastern Europe for egg donation, and because of certain legal issues. And surrogacy, they'll do in Israel with the Israeli surrogate. But we have the opposite issue. I did a lot of research in this, trying to get Israeli women to come to the States to be surrogates during the gestation and then fly back to Israel. But the legal issues, I met with lawyers in Israel, I met with agencies in Israel, and it was too legally complicated to actually bring it to fruition. So it's still a dream of mine, and I'll put it out there. Maybe people have more experience than I do, or ideas how to solve the Jewish surrogacy issue in America. But that really is it's not a halachic issue, which is kind of the major impediment with Jewish surrogacy. It's the availability. But assuming, just carrying over all of the halachic discussion from egg donation to surrogacy, it's the exact same discussion on the flip side.
Got it. Okay. If anybody has any questions about surrogacy or egg donations, drop them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end.
I'll just say one more thing about egg donation and surrogacy. I don't know if you want to have a discussion about it, but I have a discussion about this all the time. And that is, you alluded to it, disclosing the information to the children, keeping it a secret, being public about it. When it comes to egg donation, nobody has to know. No one. And typically, no one knows because you get pregnant, right? You however you got your eggs, that's how you get your eggs. But from the moment that eggs are fertilized and implanted, it's the same pregnancy that anyone else has. So if a woman wanted to hide her egg donation history, she could easily hide that. When it comes to surrogacy, and you can hide it from your community, and you can hide it from your children. I'm not saying that that's a good idea, but theoretically, the option is certainly there. When it comes to surrogacy, it's not impossible to hide it, but it's very difficult. I mean, you can wear the belly pillows, and you can get bigger as the months go on. You can get bigger and bigger and wear looser clothing, and then towards the end of the pregnancy, you can go on bed rest, and then Baruch Hashem, you can announce the birth of a child. If you are making a bris, and you're a size 0, and you're showing up to your kid's bris because you didn't actually give birth, so that might be, that for anyone who's on that wavelength, it may raise an eyebrow or two. How can you be so skinny 8 days after your birth? And what's going on over here? But people do it, right? But it's much harder to hide. So that is also a very important point when it comes to surrogacy, that this is something that the community will most probably be aware of. The children will therefore be aware of. And the whole attitude towards, your comfort level, the halachic status, etc., should be, you should be very comfortable with that and prepared to discuss that with people because it's kind of public knowledge, as opposed to egg donation, which again, I'm not saying you should hide that from your children or not hide it, But should you want to hide it, it's much more easy to do so. You'll just run into potential issues in the future if they do a DNA test and they uncover some information that will be very confusing to them, and you'll have to have answers at that point. So we can have a conversation about it if you'd like, but I don't know if we're getting off topic.
Right. I was going to say, I want to make sure that we cover our main topic, and then we can, if we have time, we can bring that up afterwards. Okay, we have a couple of things in the chat, but I'm going to leave those towards the end. Not in the chat, in the Q&A, but I'm going to leave those towards the end. I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to move over to donor sperm and discuss, the issues behind it, when is it allowed, when is it not allowed, why are there some post-kim that are absolutely, definitively against it, and those who are, who do allow it, how can, the main question that at least I'm getting from couples in regard to donor sperm is that they know that there are post-kim out there that do not allow it, and they know that there are post-kim out there that do allow it. So how can they get comfortable if they decide, if they ultimately they are comfortable with a post-sake who does allow it, how can they get comfortable knowing that there is a certain segment of the community that may not recognize their child, that thinks it's not allowed, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love for you to try to discuss as many of these pieces as possible.
Yeah. So as we mentioned at the beginning, sperm donation is more complicated from a halachic perspective, precisely because we lack the mitzvah of PUAH. So again, assuming that our halachic lifestyle is, we live in accordance to halacha, to the Torah, and however we interpret the mitzvahs and halacha, etc. And when sometimes people need a leniency, right? Sometimes people ask shilas, right? So sometimes people need a leniency. And Shulchan Aruch is full of them. You don't need me to create leniency. Shulchan Aruch is full of them. Shulchan Aruch recognizes. In Hilchos Basar B'Chalav, the Shulchan Aruch will tell you that something can be edible or should not be eaten. And then in Shulchan Aruch will say, but if this happens on Erev Shabbos, so then it can be eaten. Why should the day of the week make a difference if something's kosher or not? If the mixture of milk and meat is a forbidden mixture, so why should the day of the week make a difference? The answer is because it being prohibited is not so simple, and therefore the nature of our justification will differ between a Thursday and a Friday when there's no, ample time to prepare more food, and there's the clock, you're at the bottom of the night, and Shabbos is in an hour, so I can't go to the market and get another chicken. So halacha, even the Shulchan Aruch recognizes the sensitivity of halacha and how halacha is not a one-size-fits-all reality. That is something that I've said in almost every presentation when I speak about PUAH. That is one of the Aseret HaDibros for PUAH. Halacha, if not it's like number one, right? When it comes to the mission of PUAH, it is the recognition to help every couple, with the recognition that halacha is not a one-size-fits-all, and like every Rav should know, and every person should know, that two people can approach one rabbi with the same question and they'll both walk away with different answers, because the rabbi recognizes that this person is in his situation and she's in her situation, and therefore they get different answers. Okay. Now, the justification for sperm donation is more complicated and more difficult because we don't have PUAH at our on our side, since the father is going to be this donor. So therefore we have to look towards another justification. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, who, I don't know exactly who's on this call, but I would venture to say that you probably have heard of Rav Moshe Feinstein. People know of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein was one of the greatest poskim to ever live. I might even stop there. He was one of the greatest poskim to ever live. Rav Moshe has a number of tshuvas and a number of letters and a number of articles on sperm donation, artificial insemination, sperm donation. And Rav Moshe Feinstein permits sperm donation. It's as simple as that. And years ago, there was a very unfortunate dispute, to say, we'll use pirate language. It was a dispute between some Hasidim and Rav Moshe, and it actually got violent. His books were burned, bricks were thrown into his window. If you look in Igros Moshe, in the beginning of the 8th volume, his family wrote a biography about him and alluded to this. It was a very difficult time in Rav Moshe's life. And many of the Rabbanim and many of those community members who were against Rav Moshe's psak about artificial insemination would constantly bombard him with this question and that question. And Rav Moshe, in his greatness, didn't ignore the question. On the contrary, he responded to each and every one of them with his knowledge, with his impeccable knowledge of everything, and proved why it was permissible. Tshuva after tshuva after tshuva. I think he has 3 or 4 tshuvas in Igros Moshe. And the tshuvas that are not published in Igros Moshe, because for whatever reason they weren't included in that volume, in that work, Igros Moshe, they were published in his work on Shas. He wrote tshuvas. People asked him questions, he responded. That's Igros Moshe. Rav Moshe also published Dibros Moshe, where he has commentary on Gemara. In the Ksuvis volume, his parish, his writings on Maseches Ksuvis, in the middle, he has a whole pamphlet about sperm donation, where he included all the other tshuvas. So he wrote extensively on this topic, and he permitted it. Again, it was very controversial at the time, and it's still controversial today. Now, what boggles my mind is that me as a rabbi, I know my contemporaries and my colleagues, when you hear that Rav Moshe paskin something, you don't think twice. Rav Moshe, it was Rav Moshe. And therefore, you use Rav Moshe, whatever it is, Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe. And when it comes to this topic, all of the many Rabbanim who are so comfortable using Rav Moshe's responsa as the primary sources for their psak are uncomfortable with this. Which is interesting. Why should that be?
Right.
Rabbi David Cohen once mentioned to me, perhaps it's because it's something with such major ramifications and such major consequences, and it affects more than just you at your Shabbos table, whether something is, it's kosher, it's not kosher, this or that. The ramifications extend well beyond, your home. Many other psakim that Rav Moshe gave were also, revolutionary and impacted generations. So, it is a question that I struggle with daily. It is literally a question that I struggle with daily. That being said, the reality is that few Rabbanim are open and publicly open to endorsing and publicly permitting sperm donation. That's just the reality. Where are they coming from? Mostly they're coming from Rav Moshe, meaning their reasons to permit. Mostly it's coming from Rav Moshe. It's also driven by kind of what Rav Moshe deals with. The fundamental point that Rav Moshe makes is that what's the issue? Meaning, what exactly is the issue? Does halacha, is the approach of halacha that something is always asur until it's proven mutter, or is something mutter until it's proven asur? So if everything is mutter until it's proven asur, if there's a reason to forbid it, so then, what is the reason to forbid this otherwise mutter procedure? Rav Moshe discusses, and he goes through all the various permutations: Jewish sperm, non-Jewish sperm. So let's say you use non-Jewish sperm. So
Excuse me.
Sure.
Excuse me, just 1 second. Continue.
Sure. If you use non-Jewish sperm, so when you're using non-Jewish sperm, we don't have to worry that a Jewish woman's sperm is going to be a Jewish man's sperm is going to be entering a married woman, right? Which could potentially be a question of mamzerus. So we don't have to worry about that. Okay. So we're using a non-Jewish sperm. Do we have to be concerned that potentially siblings of the same donor will marry? Well, if you're using non-Jewish sperm, you don't have to worry about that. That would be a concern with Jewish sperm, that siblings would marry. But if you're using non-Jewish sperm, we don't have to worry about that, because when it comes to the non-Jewish yichus, we don't assume that siblings, that have that issue. So Moshe in the Tshuva basically says this, like, what's the issue? What's the problem? And what's the gain? What's the advantage? What's the benefit? A woman who is otherwise unable to conceive and to become pregnant will now be able to become a mother. It's an amazing thing. So why are we being so machmir? Why are we being so machmir when it's hard to even articulate and identify the chumrah and the reason for being machmir when the stakes are so high? That's essentially, in a nutshell, the number of tshuvas that Rav Moshe wrote. It sounds compelling, and therefore there's like this big question mark when it comes to sperm donation. Why is it that it's so not accepted? Why is it that it's so not accepted in so many different communities? Why is it difficult to find the posek that will actually be comfortable discussing this? And I don't really have a good answer for it. Other than, that it is what it is. That's what's available. That's what's out there. And unfortunately, I've been with couples literally, from the moment that they sent me their semen analysis, and they couldn't believe it that there was no sperm, to the point where they heard back from the doctor that there's complete azoospermia, or they got the results from their surgery that there was no sperm in the testicle, and then they're kind of going from rabbi to rabbi and going through that difficult, that difficult journey of getting a psak that they're comfortable with. And sometimes it's just time. I just had a baby boy was born. The Pidyon Ben was a little while ago. And this was a couple that was married from a very frum community, from a frum family. She is from a very frum family. He is from a very frum family. And they knew pretty early on that the issue was him, that he had no sperm. And it took them many years to really be comfortable with the fact that this is something that they could do. And this is something that they could be okay with for the rest of their lives. And it just took time. And I don't blame them. It took a lot of time. And when I spoke to the father right before the Pidyon Ben, he said all of his concerns, all of the worries, all of the this, all of the that. He said it literally, it's like it's out there. It's like I don't even remember it. I don't even remember at all. And the truth is, I've told this to women before. So much of the hesitation, we didn't speak about the psychological and the emotional difficulty in this whole topic of this whole parsha of third party, that a woman's going to feel that this is not my baby, this is not my child, and I've told women, I'm not a woman, but I've heard from women who've been through it, that baby is born, and the skin on skin experience, like at that moment when the baby comes to your chest, it's like, I said, this meeting that we're having right now in my house, you will not remember. You will black it out. You will not remember Elon Segelman ever. Like I will not. Maybe remember that one time we went with Rabbi Segelman? It will all be part of history, because right now it's from here on in. It's from here on in. Baby's born. This is my baby. What went into this baby? Irrelevant. This is my baby, and we are, hitting the high road. Derech hamelech nelech, as they say. So the same thing is true with sperm donation. Many times. The issue is it takes time to get to that point. It takes time to be comfortable with that. And unfortunately, I wish I had better answers for you, but I can only tell you what's out there, like what's in the trenches, like what's actually going on. And unfortunately, for the community, the azoospermic community in need of sperm donation, the support is not there like it is with egg donation and surrogacy. Unfortunately.
And do you support, meaning the general support, or the support in the Jewish community?
Yeah, support in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. Again, is Ramosha not good enough for you?
Right. Okay, so
and
let me ask you.
And I'm the one that looks crazy, by the way. Like I'm the one that's like, what's wrong with this Segelman? Like how I don't know.
Right. So let me ask you just some practical questions that I am getting in the Q&A, and also that I got beforehand. So this child, let's take, the child that's coming from a donor sperm, or the child that's coming from a donor egg. Let's take donor sperm right at the moment. So one question is the child able to say Kaddish for the father? or like when the child gets an aliyah, or the child at the breast, like who is the father?
Right. It's a very good question. I mean, unfortunately, and it could be that this is another layer of kind of confusion and another layer of just questionable, the questions that come up that would compel a rabbi to just say, listen, I don't want to get involved in this. Kaddish is one example. What was the other? The aliyah?
Kaddish, when someone gets an aliyah at the child's breast. Yeah, all of these.
So on the one hand, I want to address the question. On the other hand, and I also want to even maybe add to the complexity, not to scare anyone, but to be honest. I'm saying to be halachically honest, there are halachic questions. Kaddish is one, the aliyah is another. But let's say the bracha for pidyon haben. I had the conversation that I spoke with the father, this father that I was talking about, that told me that the whole thing is all of his emotional turmoil from before they actually gave birth, it's all behind him. So the reason why he called me was because the father, generally recites a bracha by the pidyon haben, and he's not the father. So how can he recite the bracha? The answer to that is that if he's not the father, so then Beis Din has the responsibility. And Beis Din doesn't mean three men with beards sitting down, at a table. It means the Jewish community. And since he's part of the Jewish community, just like I'm part of the Jewish community, just like anyone's part of the Jewish community, he is the representative of Beis Din. So therefore, he'll make the bracha. No one will know. They'll just think he's the father. But we know that he is not serving as the father. He's serving as the representative of Beis Din. Okay. But then, let's say, and he had a baby boy, obviously, he's at pidyon haben.
Right.
What happens if it's a baby girl and he's not the father? So we know with parents and children, we know with males and females, there are isurim of yichud. They can't be together, secluded, alone. There are issues of negia, of contact between the sexes. So obviously a father and a daughter, a mother and a son don't have the same halachos of negia that a stranger or two non-siblings would have, or two people who are not related to each other. But remember, this father is not the biological father, and therefore, for all intents and purposes, he's not related. He's a non-family member, which we would typically say you would be thereby be governed by the halachas of yichud and negia. Now, that is a very, very difficult psak to tell a father that he can't hug his daughter or can't be alone in the room with his daughter, in the home with his daughter, is a very, very intense psak. And it's not a new shaila, right? Adoption carries with it the same question.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, exactly.
Adoption carries with it the same question. Right. And the poskim have dealt with this. Right? Moshe has a tshuva, Eliezer has a tshuva, Labab Rebbe has a tshuva. Poskim take different approaches to this question. So, but that being said, there's still a question. It's important to acknowledge the fact that there is a question here. Now, the question can be circumvented or navigated around and dealt with, right? You could subscribe to the shita that holds that if you adopted a baby and you raise this baby from day 1 to whatever as a small child, so you wouldn't develop, you have the same fatherly emotions to the child and the same fatherly or motherly connection to the child. And therefore the concern of yichud and negia, just like it's not relevant for a biological parent, it would also not be relevant for the adopted parents. Now, you could subscribe to that approach, but at least there is a response. There is a question and the question was resolved, right? But it's important to not lose focus of the fact that there was a question. Even in, I'm just going to go to a totally different area of halacha for just 30 seconds. Someone told me that when he was growing up with his children in Brooklyn, when he was growing up with his children in Muncie, he would bring them to Brooklyn for Shabbos once a year to remind his children that there is a concept called Eruv, right? And I'm not commenting on the Brooklyn Eruv right now. Do not misinterpret I have no intention about discussing or addressing the Brooklyn Eruv, but he wanted to bring them to a place where there was no Eruv, just so the children would be knowledgeable the fact that there is a concept called Eruv, and you can only carry with an Eruv. They didn't even know that because they were growing up in Muncie with the Eruv and this and that, right? So if you're not even sensitive to the fact, that's also that. So we should be sensitive to the fact that there's a question, and thankfully, they're often answers. Okay. So yichud, negia, pidyon ben. So those are all important questions that have to be dealt with. Now, to the question that you asked specifically, Kaddish and the Aliyah. So the halachas of Kaddish and Aliyah are most commonly can be applied even in the case of non-biological parents. So children who are not biological children but feel a connection can say Kaddish, just like people say Kaddish for an aunt, for an uncle, for someone that didn't have anyone to say Kaddish for them. Sitting Shiva gets a little bit touchy because most of the time, people don't necessarily sit an actual halachic Shiva. Although I've had cases, I unfortunately recently had a case in my shul where a couple adopted a child who was unfortunately at risk from day one, meaning his biological mother, unfortunately, was a drug addict, and they adopted him from the hospital. They took the baby home from the hospital. At the time, she was a nurse in the hospital, and she was informed that a baby was born without a parent, and she took this baby in, and she struggled with him throughout his 18 years. I think he was about 18. Unfortunately, he was at risk from day one, and unfortunately, he committed suicide, unfortunately. And but he was adopted, and I had this discussion with the parents whether there is a formal shiva for who they called their son, but they knew that it wasn't their biological son. And what was most comfortable for both of us, for the couple and for the halachic perspective, is that we're not going to have the formal shiva, but whatever shiva she needed to mourn the loss of this baby who she brought home from the hospital 18 years ago and who spent days and nights not sleeping, just worrying about him and taking care of him and bringing him from here to there. So to deprive a parent of such a shiva is difficult, and to deprive a child of a shiva for a parent, even though it's not biologically. So again, that Avelos question is a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more complicated. But for those basic issues, we would say it's not a problem. We would address the child by the father's name and vice versa. On the ksuba, we would call on a ksuba there would be no problem to have the father as the name on the ksuba, even though it's not biologically the father.
And what about if someone is sick, a chola? So in terms of the mother's name using a donor egg.
Same, 100%.
Same.
She's the woman that plays the motherly role. So for all intents and purposes, she's the mother.
Okay. A couple other questions here. Someone is asking in general. Now we're just getting into general questions as opposed to more about sperm specifically. Someone asked a question about just about the hashgacha in terms of everything being watched, that we know that she's saying she knows that everything is being done very carefully. Is there a chance that something is mixed up or the eggs get stolen, or like what kinds of assurances or what kind of pieces do people need to have in place in order to try to make sure as much as possible that let's call it the eggs or the sperm at this point are exactly that they think that they're getting, exactly what they think they're getting?
Yeah. I want to be very clear. What I'm about to say is not anti-doctors. I see the MD letters right after your name, so I don't want to start with doctors. I don't want to start with doctors.
I'm not serving in that capacity right at this moment. I'm just here as the moderator.
Yeah, we don't assume at PUAH. I mean, you'll hear this from every single Rav. We do not assume that hashgacha was implemented because of malicious behavior. That is certainly not the case. Protocols have been introduced. I mean, now more than ever, protocols have been introduced in modern laboratories to see to it that malicious behavior doesn't take place, and even accidental mix-ups don't take place. Now, that being said, we can get into a whole discussion about supervision that I don't really want to get into. But that being said, I just want to mention two things. Number one, unfortunately, there are cases of mix-ups. And it's far and few between. It's very, very, very uncommon. And I reiterate, and this is for public, you can tape this and record it and blast it all over. If you've done IUI, IVF, etc., third party, without supervision that does not compromise the authenticity of the child, the legitimacy of the child, one iota. There's no, I don't think you do not need to do a DNA test. You don't need to go start grabbing your going to your local pharmacies or whatever, getting a DNA, genetic counselors and geneticists and finding DNA tests to swab your kids. Chas v'sholom, do not, I repeat, do not do that. That being said, since we have heard of cases of mix-ups in labs, most recently in LA with a doctor that I have referred to, Baruch Hashem, it wasn't one of our couples, but just a few months ago, there was, basically in my backyard, a wonderful Jewish Israeli doctor who is a great guy. I know him personally. I refer patients there, but unfortunately there was a mix-up in his lab. I don't think it was under his watch, but in his lab. And unfortunately, parents gave birth to children who were not theirs. And it's a major issue. Now, Baruch Hashem, as I said, it wasn't one of our couples. It was a non-Jewish couple. It wasn't with Hashkafa. But just to know, have that peace of mind, knowing that there's another set of eyes in the labs, and there's a method where we will seal all genetic material to the point where it is tamper-proof. We will know if someone messed with this vial. The labs that we love to work with are the ones that really celebrate PUAH. They bring us in, they're transparent, they let us look and do everything because we feel more comfortable in those labs. Labs that say, don't come in, we don't need you, it makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable, Why are you being so tough? Why are you being so rough and rigid and not allowing us to just, what are you hiding, right? Again, we're not suspect. We don't suspect anyone having malicious intent or malicious behavior, but we just want to make sure that everyone can just go to sleep and at night, safe, sound, and relaxed.
I'll even add to it. I know that there are many very chashuv poskim who say that hashgacha is not necessary, and that is, just tagging on to exactly what you just said, that there is no one that needs to go back and go check and go this, if things are done already.
Correct. Can't stress that enough. There is another thing you mentioned, and that's stolen material, right? Stolen eggs. I have heard from both ends, right? From patients having this claim, from doctors having this claim, from it's crazy that the doctor would even have a claim. You're the doctor, but especially the agencies having the claim that eggs are stolen. Meaning doctors claim that the egg donation agency has stolen eggs from them, and the egg agency has claimed that doctors can steal eggs from them. When you do it with supervision, again, I don't suspect anyone from stealing anything, but at least you don't even, the argument doesn't even get off the ground. Right. You don't even allow for the question to leave your mouth and even begin to develop even a little bit of anxiety. None. You know for sure what was retrieved, what was harvested is what was frozen. That's it, Right. So, again, it's something that we definitely push. It's something which we think is very important. I see there's a question in the chat about payment. All of PUAH's services, including supervision, are fully subsidized. So the patient doesn't pay more for supervision when they order supervision. They can do supervision till today and tomorrow. They will not pay a penny. How much they donate? We're about to launch a $1 million campaign. So $1 million would make it much easier for us if we would, if you wanted to donate $1 million right now, our campaign would be very simple. I can't tell you how much to donate. Any amount to donate, we sincerely appreciate it. Again, all of it's all run by donations. So, but it's something we would not charge the couple for. It's something that it is a policy that we have in place. We encourage everyone to do it at no cost or a fully subsidized cost, and it can save a lot of headache. One interesting thing I'll tell you, because I'm sorry they're cutting you off. Are you upset at me? You're not upset at me that I'm cutting you off, right?
I'm not. You're not cutting me off.
I know, but I see you're about to speak, and I just.
No. I have one. I have one. No. I have one last question for you, and I want to make sure that we get it in before we close.
I just wanted to say something so important because I spoke to someone about it today. And I just wanted to share with you because it's wild. I was talking about a specific case, and it happens to be this is a married woman, but she's getting older and she's actually thinking about freezing more eggs and embryos. And she asked me about supervision, and she mentioned about a friend of hers who were single, who were told that they don't have to do supervision, and they were kind of questioning supervision. So I shared with her an insight, again, like what we spoke about earlier, that not every insight is necessarily a halachic or medical one.
Right.
There was a couple, this is a true story. There was a couple who got engaged, older single, and older singles got engaged, and they got engaged knowing that she froze eggs. That was something that was very important to him. So in the process, when he was inquiring about her egg freezing, he didn't ask her whether she froze with supervision. And as the engagement process began, and they started to speak more intimately about certain things, so the idea of supervision did come up, and she told him that she did not freeze her eggs with supervision. So she explained the reason why she didn't freeze her eggs with supervision was because she consulted with her Rav, and her Rav said it's not necessary. The boy, the chassan, the groom, when he heard about this, he inquired from his Rebbe whether this is a problem, and his Rebbe said, yes, it's a problem, to the point where you cannot fertilize those eggs if they weren't frozen with supervision. And the Rav wanted him to break off the shidduch because the eggs are basically useless. Wow. They ended up thawing and doing a DNA test and refreezing, and Baruch Hashem, everything turned out to be as it was, and they're able to go ahead with the marriage. So the advice that I propose, and I share this with Rabbanim frequently, is that there's one conversation that takes place between a husband and wife regarding their IUI, their IVF, etc. You have all the parties at the table, they're in the conversation, and they can be a part of the conversation. But when a Rav is advising a single girl, we don't know who that husband is going to be, right? We don't know who that Prince Charming will be. And maybe it will be someone who is very, very adamant that eggs must be frozen with supervision. So why would a Rav give the psak to a woman that she doesn't need it because that's what he feels? But you are handicapping her. You are prohibiting her from all of her options. Right. Open as many doors as you can and don't close doors. So I think it's again, and I don't want to say anything to anyone that's going to offend any single girl that is already frozen without supervision. This was an extreme case, which is not the mainstream case. It's an extreme case, which I don't think will happen again, hopefully, but it brings out a certain point that sometimes we should think of twice and in the future before rendering the psak now, especially when it comes to a single girl whose future is more unknown than a couple that are sitting in front of you. That's all.
Absolutely. I thank you. It's actually an incredible point, right? Because at the end of the day, you want, and anyone would want to go to the most machmir opinion in order to be able to satisfy everyone so that you don't end up with this kind of situation. So absolutely.
Initially, the mashkichot that when PUAH began, this 35 years ago, the rule was that the mashkichot had to be like Hasidic women who kept all the chumras in the book. And it was precisely for that reason that Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Menachem Borstein, at the time it was also Rav Moshe Halberstam Zatzal, they didn't want anyone to say, oh, that was your mashkicha? Oh, no, that hashgacha is not for me. That's chalav stam, that's OUD. I only eat chalav Yisrael. No, we go the highest so that no one could say anything. And to this day, we have very high standards for our mashkichot, Baruch Hashem.
Amazing. Baruch Hashem. Okay. One last question. I think, and this probably will kind of bring a number of different pieces together and a number of different questions. Okay. So I want to be mindful of time. So we have about 7 minutes left and I'm going to ask you my question and give you a couple of minutes. And then I want to, and then we have another question in the Q&A that I want to try to get to in the next. Okay, Rabbi, we have 6 minutes. How do all of these halachos, and I guess obviously specifically for a man, if you're using donor sperm, how do the halachos differ or become more complicated if someone is a Cohen?
That's a good question. Okay. If someone is a Cohen, well, let's put it like this. If someone is a Cohen, so it is very problematic to use a donor sperm from a non-Jewish donor and have a boy, because that boy will not be a Cohen.
Right.
And therefore, when you go up to Duchen, that boy cannot accompany you. And it will be very embarrassing, and it will be just a terrible thing. In that, I have had these cases, and often the couple will take the sperm and not inseminate, but do IVF. So usually, even though you don't need IVF to get pregnant with donor sperm, because you could just do an IUI, they'll do IVF with gender selection and only have girls.
Okay, got it.
Only have girls. They'll do IVF and only have girls. So yes, he won't have any sons duchening with him, but that will help. That will really absolve,
Right.
a major, okay, that's number one. Number two, and the question is also for a Levi. The question is also for a Levi.
Right. Right.
I'm a Levi personally. So, and I had recently a case of a Levi who was azoospermic. What did he do? He wanted a sperm. Well, no, so he didn't have any children. And he wanted. He didn't want to disclose it. This was from the Sephardic community. He was Syrian, and he was so secretive. He did not plan on telling. We spoke about disclosing, not disclosing. He said, absolutely not. No one is going to know about this. They said, if no one's going to know about this, that means your son is going to think that he's a Levi, right? Your son is going to think that he's a Levi. Now, it's not the end of the world if he goes and has the Levi Aliyah. It's not the end of the world. But what is an issue is if this Levi thinks that he's a Levi, right? So you think your son is a Levi, and he's going to have a son. And his wife is going to say, oh, do we need to do a Pidyon Ben? And he's going to say, no, we don't need a Pidyon Ben. I'm a Levi, right? So I'm a Levi. There's no Pidyon Ben. I never had a Pidyon Ben before, right? So I'm a Levi. So now that kid is not a Levi. That father is not a Levi. He was born from his sperm donor. So really, there is an obligation for him to do Pidyon Ben. And he is not going to be carrying out that obligation of Pidyon Ben, and the child would therefore need to be put to himself, but the kid's never going to know about it because the father's never going to tell anyone. So that is a potential issue as well. That's insofar as the actual couple, the male being a Cohen. The other Cohen consideration is that a Cohen is not allowed to marry someone who's a Gioris. A Cohen is not allowed to marry someone who's a convert. And therefore, when we deal with egg donation, and one of those ingredients was non-Jewish, whether it's the non-Jewish womb or the non-Jewish egg, if we ever using one of those, so according to the opinion that non-Jewish ingredient is actually the one that determines motherhood in Judaism, therefore, a gerus would be necessary. And if it's gerus would be necessary for that girl, she would then not be able to marry a Cohen. So within that, there's differing opinions. Some poskim say that's correct. The baby girl who was converted after she was born from a non-Jewish egg, or after she was born from a non-Jewish surrogate, should not marry a Cohen. That's one approach. There's another approach that says that it's true that they had a conversion, but that conversion wasn't a real full-fledged conversion to the point where she would actually be forbidden to a Cohen. It's kind of just to check all the boxes, to dot your I's and to cross your T's. That's why they did a gerus, but real gerus. So there is a machlokus about that. There is a machlokus about that. And most of the time we are machmer, at least to try to navigate, the resumes that come in where the parents, they look at the Katz and the Cohen's, resumes, and they say, I don't really like, no, he's 5'6". We want someone. No, let's do. But I love 5'6". No, you don't want that one. Let's go to Goldman. So if they could do that, that would be best. Right. That would be the best approach, to try to avoid the Cohen route for the baby girl that had a conversion after a non-Jewish egg or a non-Jewish surrogacy. Okay.
I mean, like my brain is spinning with all of these different possibilities, but I am so grateful for you being here. I'm going to ask this last question, which it's impossible for you to answer without, you could spend a half an hour just on this question, but I think let's give it a couple of minutes just to kind of lay out some of the details, and then we're really going to end. And I want to say to all of you that, and as Rabbi Segelman opened with today, that he and the PUAH team are available for consultations with each of you as you feel necessary, because again, all of these conversations that we're having here today are meant to give you a general broad overview. This is not meant to be a specific sock for your own situation. That has to be dealt with on an individual and couple basis. And so you're going to need to seek out him or your own posek for all of these answers. But to sort of close this out for a minute and just to lay out what the different possibilities are, the question is, can you talk about some of the pros and cons of keeping donor egg or donor sperm secret from the child or children? And again, as I said, like this is, we could talk about this an entire
webinar.
All right, just answer it in 30 seconds,
So the answer in 30 seconds goes as follows. I asked this question once to Rabbi Mordechai Willig, and Rabbi Mordechai Willig gave me the 30-second answer, the 10-second, the 5-second answer. He said, that is not a question for a Rav. I'll quote you what he said. He said, this is not a question for a Rav. It's a question for David Pelkowitz, for Dr. David Pelkowitz. It's a question for the psychologists, for the therapists. What his answer was that there is no, this is not necessarily a halachic sugya with a psak, with a Shulchan Aruch, with a Mishnah Brura. This is it's a very sensitive issue, and it's it's really custom tailored to each and every situation. And it's a major issue. I got a call from a father who couldn't sleep one night because I don't remember, now he has 2 children. I don't remember at the time whether he had only one child, or was after his second was born. But he comes from a certain Sephardic community, and he couldn't sleep at night because he is hearing more and more that the men in his community were doing paternity tests because they wanted to see precisely how Sephardi are they. Where exactly they come from, where in Persia, Morocco, and Iraq, and Iran. They wanted to find out and trace their lineage back in percentages. So he was, going crazy because he took a sperm donation. So his, who knows where his sperm was from. That from that couple, for these children, the mother was the mother, but not the sperm. And his fear is a real one, because I have heard from pediatricians that they would not be shocked that if in, I don't know, however many years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, if standard protocol, when baby comes home from hospital and comes into the pediatrician's office for his annual checkup, so he'll get this vaccine and there'll be this, schedule, for this shot and for that shot, and his genetic test and his DNA test. And all of a sudden, right before your eyes, you'll have all of this information, this genetic information that, we've never known up until now. And why should a person necessarily know? But from the medical standpoint, it might be significant to know precisely, what the genetic and the DNA background behind this patient is. And yet, if we try to disclose that information, and you sit down with your doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, it's clear that you were not born. You are not. Your parents are not your parents." That can hit you like a ton of bricks, and that could. I don't want to be hard. That could destroy a person. That could destroy an individual. It could destroy a relationship. I mean, the thought of it is frightening, and therefore, I think that this is an example of an area of fertility that has shifted from what used to be, which was hide it and no one's going to find out, and what nobody knows will not hurt, and goodbye, to more of an approach of embracing reality that no, there's 23andMe, Ancestry.com, paternity tests. People on Father's Day are sending paternity tests to their children, to their friends, and saying Happy Father's Day. Like, that's accepted norm, in society in some places. So with the accessibility of such tests, it really requires us to think and rethink our decision to disclose that information to the children. And what's most important is to be in touch with a therapist, with a psychologist, with a social worker, whoever it may be, who is in tune with your family, the family dynamics, understands the family politics, the personalities, everything that goes, that makes up this family, to, if you decide to disclose, how to disclose in the best way, when to disclose, right? Those are all very important questions, and no two answers may be alike, since every family is so complicated and so different. So I think that without answering the question, I think just bringing light to a shift of attitude, one of embracing the reality that we ought to think this is a question that we ought to consider, and consider it strongly, because it's a serious issue, it's a relevant issue, it's a sensitive one, but I think it's one that that can, when navigated and done correctly, it can be done in a beautiful way and in a positive way. And there are a lot of studies, we're not about from adoption. The studies were already done, the research has been done. So it's kind of just taking that which we already know and implementing into our modern lives. So it's a good question. It's an amazing question. It's an important question, and we have to keep on thinking. There's no right answer.
Absolutely. I thank you, Rabbi Segelman, for your time tonight, for your incredibly thoughtful, detailed, and really beautiful answers to help give people a sense of really what this is and how to begin to think about it. I think, I know that a number of people who have signed up and a number of people who are on here, are considering these options for themselves potentially, and have not yet broached the topic with their POSAIC, but know that it's coming down the line based on their medical testing. Some are in the midst of the process already and still want to hear the nuances of the different pieces, and others have done it in the past and want to hear how halacha has changed, how it's not changed, and the different aspects. So I thank you for being accessible, for agreeing to do this, knowing these are areas of halachos that are not simple, they are not easy, they're fraught with all of the emotions layered on top of the halachos. And I'm just very grateful to you. Please tell everyone how to find you, how to reach you, should they want to reach out personally with more questions.
Sure. If I type in the chat, if I type my email in the chat, will it come up on everyone's screens?
It might, being that I don't know anything about technology.
So I'm going to type my email address, and that is E.Segelman.
I will send it out to everyone afterwards, so I can do that as well.
Okay, E.Segelman at PUAHfertility.org. E.Segelman, and that's Segelman, Segelman at PUAH fertility.org. I hope that that came up in your chat boxes. You can feel free to send me an email, and especially if you write in the subject, I was supposed to have a baby, or Aimee Baron, or a webinar, whatever it is, just to spark my attention, that would be helpful, and I'll be happy to speak to each and every one of you about your specific cases and your situations. Thank you, Dr. Baron, for inviting me and allowing me to talk about, as what I said, is a topic near and dear to my heart, and one which is a real pleasure to speak about, because I do it so often, and I don't think that enough people are talking about it. So bringing this to the table, yasher koach to you.
And yasher koach to you. And to everyone, there are a few questions here we didn't get a chance to answer. I apologize, we ran out of time. Please reach out to Rabbi Segelman.
I did it on purpose. I did it on purpose so you'd invite me back. Okay, so we
exactly. It's part two. We're gonna have part two. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night, everyone. And please reach out any questions to myself or to Rabbi Segelman.
You will.
Okay. Bye bye.